In the next couple lectures, I want to talk about valid deductive forms of argument as well as some fallacies. I'm not going to cover every single one your reading talks about. I'll cover most of them, but I'm going to put more emphasis on conditionals, arguments that have the form if A then B or if P then Q, and then use that to try to prove something. I'm going to do this because conditional arguments that use the conditional, are really important. People also make a lot of mistakes with them. So they're important. They're also one type of argument that people make mistakes with. So I'm going to put more emphasis on those than some of the other forms of argument that the reading touches on. I will discuss other ones, but like I said, I'm just not going to put as much emphasis on them. Okay, so let's go into valid deductive arguments as well as fallacies. So one of the first ones your reading talks about, which I do think is worth touching on, is what it calls a disjunctive syllogism. This isn't a conditional, but I think it's worth talking about pretty quickly. And a disjunctive syllogism, that's the fancy way of saying this. You can also call this an argument by elimination. That's the less sort of fancy way to put this. And I think it's a good way to put it, just argument by elimination. Let's not make this exotic or weird because we do this all the time. We use this kind of argument, right? Either P or Q, not P, so Q, right? It's got to be one or the other. It's not one of them, so it's the other one, right? Look, we use disjunctive syllogism. If you guys ever watch murder mysteries or read murder mysteries, one of the things the detective will often do in the murder mystery is, he has a whole range of suspects. Usually what'll happen is he eliminates them all, and then he decides, well, it has to be one of them, so we'll go back. But at the very least, the simple case is he goes through his list of suspects, eliminates them until only one remains, right? Either the butler or the cook committed the murder. The cook didn't do it, so the butler did. Right, that's the stereotype that, I don't know why that is, right? I don't know what murder mystery, had the butler. Probably something Agatha Christie wrote. She's, Anyway, butler, cook did it. Cook didn't do it, so the butler did it, right? That's an argument by elimination, an example of the disjunctive syllogism. Now, one thing your reading doesn't say, but I think is worth keeping in mind, your reading just talks about either P or Q. You can use this kind of argument with more cases, right? That's what we often see in the murder mystery. Either P or Q or R or S. That's another disjunctive syllogism. It's just more complicated. You have to eliminate more cases, right? If it's either P or Q or R, then we've got to eliminate P and R before we get Q, right? Butler, cook, maid, his brother, right? Then we'd have to eliminate the cook, the maid, and the brother before we got to the butler, right? So sometimes with two cases, but it can be more complicated. It's one of these things. You have this or, you just eliminate till you're left with one case. That's how the disjunctive syllogism works. Pretty simple, not complicated. It's worth knowing about. It will pop up a couple times in arguments we're making in this class or talking about, but it's not complicated. People don't tend to mess this one up. Now, as I said, what people do mess up are arguments using conditionals. So I'm going to talk about a couple valid forms using conditionals. We'll also talk about some fallacies, right? Conditionals, like I said, If P, then Q. If this one thing, then the other thing. That's a conditional. We'll talk about arguments that use it, whether well or badly. Now, one valid form of argument, and a very important valid form of argument that uses a conditional, is so-called modus ponens. If P, then Q, P, therefore Q, right? Now look, they always use Latin jargon in talking about, these arguments. I have no idea what the Latin jargon means. I took Latin in high school. My Latin teacher was sort of having a midlife crisis. I learned a lot about why he hated his job of being a Latin teacher and how he was going to quit the next year, which he did. I learned very, very little Latin, though. So I don't know what modus ponens means. Just know if you see it, it is a valid form of argument. Now look, all this, if P, then Q, P, whatever, that's very abstract. I think it helps to give some actual examples that use modus ponens. If Hampton Roads gets a foot of snow, then TCC will cancel classes the next day, right? We probably don't even need to get a foot of snow. I'm guessing half an inch would do it. But a foot would definitely do it, right? So, if we get a foot of snow, no classes the next day, right? We'll go for a foot because that's definite, even though half an inch or even a few flakes would probably be enough, right? So, if P, if we get snow, then Q, we'll cancel classes. We will get a foot of snow tomorrow. That's probably not true as you're listening to this, but let's suppose we do. So TCC would cancel classes the day after we get all that snow. If P, then Q, P, so Q. Another example using modus ponens. If Jane got an A on the calculus final, she will pass the class. She got an A on the final, so she will pass the class, right? If P, then Q, P, so Q, right? If she does this well on the test, she'll pass. She did that well on the test, so she will pass, right? Pretty easy, pretty obvious. Hopefully this is not mystifying to any of you guys. Modus ponens is a form of argument that works. So why spend so much time about it if it's not that difficult? Because there are two fallacies that look like modus ponens, that look like they're valid, but are not. A fallacy is an argument that seems valid or convincing, but it isn't. Sometimes people will distinguish between formal fallacies and informal ones. Formal ones are ones that look valid but aren't. Informal ones are ones that go wrong in another way. We'll mostly talk about formal ones, right? Ones that look valid but aren't. So, two very common fallacies with the conditional. People mess these up all the time. And they're very, very closely related. Denying the antecedent and affirming the consequent. Look, you don't need to remember the jargon with these. Just know that if you see an argument of this sort, it's not valid. It's not a good argument. The reading I gave you guys doesn't talk about these, but I do think it's worth mentioning because you should be on the lookout for these. They are very common fallacious arguments. I think a lot of times people will make arguments of this sort and not even realize that's what they're doing. The fallacy of denying the antecedent. This fallacy has the following form. If P, then Q. Not P, so not Q. Well, why is this a fallacious argument, right? Look at the premises themselves, right? The premises tell you if you have P, then you're going to have Q as well, right? But number one never says that P is the only way to get Q, right? Other things might cause or make Q happen. So you don't know from the fact that you don't have P that you don't have Q. The argument never said that. The argument says, well, if you have P, then you're going to get Q. It never says if you don't have P, then you won't get Q. Well, you guys might think that that's bewildering. That might seem super abstract to you. Let's make it clear with a couple of examples, right? If we get a foot of snow Sunday, TCC won't have classes Monday. We won't get a foot of snow Sunday, so TCC will have classes Monday, right? Look, remember, a valid argument is one where if the premises are true, the conclusion can't be false. But you can imagine all kinds of cases where 1 and 2 are true and we don't have classes Monday, right? If we have a hurricane barreling down on us, we're not going to have classes on Monday, right? If Monday were Labor Day, we wouldn't have classes on Monday, right? So lots of reasons that we cancel classes. A foot of snow isn't the only one, so we don't know from the fact that we don't get snow that we'll definitely have classes, right? Holidays, Labor Day, Martin Luther King Day. Don't remember any other holidays we have on a Monday. I'm sure they exist. But holidays will cancel classes on a Monday, right? Hurricanes will cancel classes. As I was giving this to students in the past, I remember asking, when we had in-person classes, I asked somebody to say why this isn't, valid. And he's like, other stuff will cancel class, like a nuclear war would cancel class. I'm like, yeah, nuclear war would cancel class, but why are you jumping straight to nuclear war, right? Flooding would do it, hurricanes would do it, or how about a nice holiday, right? We don't have to go straight to nuclear war, right? Many reasons, though, that we might cancel classes. So this is an invalid argument because you can imagine ways where premises 1 and 2 are true, but we don't have classes on that Monday. Another example, just to make this clear, right? If you guys follow baseball, if the fans riot, the home team loses. That's because, if you're unable to play the game, the team hosting the game forfeits, so they lose, right? So if the fans riot, the White Sox will lose. For years, I used to follow the White Sox. I kind of gotten out of following baseball, but, I used to live in Chicago for a while. I actually followed the White Sox, kind of rooted for them to a fair number of White Sox games. But for years, the Chicago White Sox were infamous because they, some other reasons, right? But also the one team to ever throw the World Series. But also one of them was for years they had the distinction of being the last team to lose a game because their fans rioted. Disco Demolition Night, not the best idea. You can look it up. There's been a lot written on it. Stupid idea that they decided to have this promotion. There was some bad promotion in a lot of other ways. Fans rioted, they lost. Anyway, so if the fans riot, the White Sox will lose. The fans won't riot, so the White Sox won't lose, right? Plug in whatever team you want here. I just think of the White Sox. They no longer have the record. I forget who does. I think the last team to have the fans riot gave them baseballs, which is not a good idea. Never give the fans anything they can throw, so they started throwing stuff on the field. I think that degenerated into a riot. Either that or they gave $1 beer. I can't remember which, but neither of those is a good idea, right? Anyway, back to my point. If the fans riot, the White Sox will in fact lose. The fans won't riot. But just from the fact that the fans don't riot doesn't mean you're going to win the baseball game, right? There's plenty of ways to lose a baseball game besides your fans rioting. You might just be outscored by the other team. That happens plenty of times too, right? So if the fans riot, they will lose. But just from the simple fact the fans don't riot, well, we don't know from that they're going to win, right? Anyway, so hopefully this example of denying the antecedent is clear to you guys. Affirming the consequent is a very, very similar sort of fallacy. These two are really closely related. So affirming the consequent is if P, then Q, Q, so P. But again, it's the same mistake, right? The argument never says that P is the only way to get Q, right? So you don't know from the fact that you have Q that you necessarily have P, because there might be other ways to get it besides having P, right? Again, super abstract, but some examples. Go back to our argument about Jane and her calculus final. If Jane gets an A on the final, she'll pass calculus. She passed calculus, so she must have gotten an A on the final. Well, but we don't know that, right? There might be plenty of other ways for her to pass the class besides getting an A, right? It might turn out that a B, her average is high enough that a B on the final will also get her to pass the class. The argument says an A will do it. It never says that a B won't do it, right? Or it might be, there's some extra credit. She did the extra credit, right? Other ways, for all the argument tells us, there might be other ways she can pass this class, get the point she needs, so we don't know from the fact she passed that she got an A on the final. If she does get an A on the final, she'll definitely pass, but there may well be other ways for her to pass, so we don't know from the fact that she passed that she has an A on the final, right? Another example, very true, if a baseball hits the window, it will break, right? Certainly true of my windows, I'm going to guess, unless you have, paid for bulletproof glass or something, it's true of yours. Well, that's very true. A baseball hits the window, it's going to break. But if you come home and see a broken window, you wouldn't know that a baseball hit it necessarily, right? Why? Lots of other stuff will break a window, right? A golf ball will break your window. A softball is not a baseball, but a softball will also break your window, right? A rock will break a window. A brick will break a window. If a baseball hits it, you know it'll break, but you don't know from the fact it broke that it was a baseball that did it, right? That's another example of this fallacy. Be able to spot it. Hopefully you guys can see why it's a fallacy. In all these cases, we can imagine ways that the premises are true and the conclusion's false. If a baseball were to hit the window, it would break. It's broken, but we can imagine all kinds of ways that it could be broken, that a baseball didn't hit it. Baseball examples, sadly, we don't know from the fact the fans don't riot that the team won, because there's plenty of other ways to lose a baseball game, right? And so on. Remember the definition of validity. Validity, if the premises are true, we can't even imagine that the conclusion could be false. With these fallacious arguments, we can imagine ways where the premises are true and the conclusion is false.